Our coverage continues here on News Nation tonight as the President of the United States speaking just moments ago as the U.S. has started its military supremacy. The airspace above Iran, hammering missile sites and military targets with precision firepower. President Trump saying the U.S. now wants to fight more than Iran does.
The United States military, together with the wonderful Israeli partners, continues to totally demolish the enemy far ahead of schedule.
And on the ground tonight, a new front, potentially? The commander-in-chief backing local fighters on Iran's border. Is that the next step toward a possible uprising? America's most famous general, David Petraeus, here in moments. Also tonight, crude power. What the war in Iran means here at home for prices at the pump. Plus, Noem, no more. A major shakeup at the Department of Homeland Security. Why Kristi Noem is out and a senator from Oklahoma is in. And that is where we begin tonight, as the commander-in-chief today with two major statements. First, blessing a potential uprising in Iran from forces in the Middle East known to America's military. In an interview with Reuters, President Trump touted the possibility of Kurdish fighters launching an Iranian offensive. And with the backdrop of war, a major decision on the home front. President Trump swapping out Homeland Security secretaries. General David Petraeus is with us in moments. Robert Sherman on the ground in Tel Aviv. But first tonight to our Kelly Meyer live at the White House. Kelly?
Yeah, hey there, Blake. And you remember this from Trump 1. We were reporting on many exits, often on Fridays, a lot during his first term. But this is the first one that we're hearing of in Trump 2. And a White House official tells me that President Trump did speak to soon-to-be former DHS Secretary Kristi Noem ahead of his Truth Social post that she would be getting a new role. We also know, we're told that this was a long time coming. One source even telling me she was, quote, cooked after that hearing on Capitol Hill, especially that exchange with Republican Senator Kennedy over the $220 million ad buy using taxpayer money. Kennedy told reporters Trump called him after that testimony in which she swore under oath that Trump had approved it. Trump says he didn't. Now, Mullin told reporters today he found out just before reporters did, and that it wasn't a complete surprise, but it did come as a little bit of a surprise. He still has to be confirmed in the U.S. Senate, and the Democratic leader there, Chuck Schumer, already saying he is a no on his nomination, saying that the Senate should not consider any DHS Secretary nominee until DHS and ICE are reined in, as he puts it. Take a listen to this.
We're going to try to earn everybody's vote. I want people to understand, when I go into this position, yes, I'm a Republican, yes, I'm conservative, but Department of Homeland Security is to keep everybody, regardless if you support me, if you don't support me, regardless of what your thoughts are.
And one Democratic senator that has already shared he is a yes, that's John Fetterman from Pennsylvania. Blake.
Kelly Meyer, live at 1600. Kelly, thank you. Mick Mulvaney joining us later in the hour for what this could potentially mean and how all of this happened. Mick Mulvaney later tonight. Now over to our Robert Sherman on the ground in Tel Aviv, live for us once again. And Robert, the U.S. military unleashing what is now something that we have never seen before, at least in many decades, across that region.
Without question, Blake, American and Israeli forces have been pounding away at targets in Iran, in the central and western portion of the countries. In the skies above Iran, there have been B-52s in the air. There have been B-2s in the air, hitting ballistic missile sites. As the Secretary of War confirmed, Israeli forces have been targeting the paramilitary groups in Iran responsible for repressing the demonstrators to possibly give Iranian citizens the opportunity to rise up. And the pressure, according to the Secretary of War, won't be going anywhere.
In just the last hour, U.S. B-2 bombers dropped dozens of 2,000-pound penetrator bombs targeting deeply buried ballistic missile launchers. Notably, we've also struck Iran's equivalent of Space Command, which degrades their ability to threaten Americans.
But the scope of this conflict is expanding, with a 12th nation being dragged into the fray. Azerbaijan today seeing Iranian drones fall and impact in their exclave, hitting near a school, hitting an airport. Baku is furious tonight, with their president saying this to Iran, quote, "We are ready to demonstrate our strength against any hostile force, and they should not forget this in Iran." Azerbaijan has put their military at the highest level of alertness. And then there's the question of, will any groups be joining the United States and Israel? The Kurds have been a big talking point here, with their leadership publicly not saying that they're firmly in, not saying if they're firmly out, but the president saying in an interview with Reuters that if the Kurds do decide to go into Iran, they would be welcomed. Blake?
Robert Sherman, live for us tonight. Tel Aviv once again. Robert, thank you. So I want to show you here where our military stands and really the thinking of the commander-in-chief 6 days in to the operations in Iraq. Central Command today, for example, releasing more video of U.S. strikes pounding Iranian assets once again today. And as you can see here from this video of a naval base in southwest Iran where the strikes continue to take out Iranian assets, ballistic missiles, destroying an aircraft hangar there in Iran. The campaign also focusing heavily on Iranian missile launcher outposts, damaging the regime's ability to launch weapons, making way for the U.S. and its aircraft to have the freedom to strike deeper inland. The White House now aiming to completely take over Iran's airspace. But just over an hour ago, the commander-in-chief also had this message for the Iranian people.
Now is the time to stand up for the Iranian people and help take back your country. You're going to have a chance after all these years to take back your country. Accept immunity. We'll give you immunity. And we'll be giving you really the right side of history, because that's what it is.
And new tonight, Iran responding to the sinking of its most prized warship. This was the video that the U.S. military put out the other day. The Iranian foreign minister vowing revenge. But the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, saying this.
We're now up over 30 ships. And in just the last few hours, we hit an Iranian drone carrier ship, roughly the size of a World War II aircraft carrier. And as we speak, it's on fire.
But among the most significant movement could actually be taking place on the ground. President Trump is now openly encouraging the Kurds to launch an Iranian offensive, telling Reuters in an interview that it would be, quote, wonderful, as he put it. Now, there are believed to be in the area here, in the region here, at least north of 30 million Kurds in the Middle East, and they make up 10% of Iran's population. As you see here, they live in Armenia, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran as well. And you might remember that they were key partners with the U.S. going back decades now. For example, when we toppled Saddam Hussein 23 years ago. And as this map of U.S. airstrikes that the Pentagon released on Wednesday shows, the United States and Israel have been hammering here, especially the northwest part of that region, perhaps clearing the way for a potential uprising, as Robert just outlined there. Joining us now, General David Petraeus, former commander, U.S. Central Command, former CIA director as well. General, it's an honor. We thank you so much for being with us tonight. As the president talked about this possible, that it would be wonderful if the Kurds potentially went forward, how significant is this as you see it and knowing the history that the president seems to be laying the possibility for this?
Well, I think it's significant. The Kurds are great fighters. We know them very, very well. We worked alongside them in Iraq. We supported them in northeastern Syria to take down the Islamic State there. But it's a small force. It's only 10% of the population, as you noted. The number of fighters will not be that large. So keep in mind that they're going up against a regime force that is very battered, but is basically dispersed and is still carrying out regime survival. That force, the regime force, totals somewhere around 1 million men under arms. It can actually be larger if the besieged militia, the pipe swingers that kill people on the streets, tens of thousands, along with the national police during the demonstrations, they can even call up reserves for hundreds of thousands more. So this is going to take a very substantial force. This could actually perhaps extend Kurdish coverage or control of some of the country where they are the predominant force, predominant population, but it's not going to be what is necessary. This is not the Northern Alliance, if you will, to harken back to the force that we enabled with our air power, but was on the ground forcing the Taliban to mass. And of course, the Taliban was not the regime forces of Iran. So they get very, very heavily damaged. Their headquarters are destroyed, their leaders are killed, their depots are blown up, and this is continuing. This is systematic. We're probably talking over 5,000 targets that have now been struck. And as the Admiral mentioned, well over 20 ships, including the one that most concerned us, which is the drone aircraft carrier that they had established. So enormous damage, and now painstakingly going after the missile force. That's what worries everyone the most. That's what can do the most damage. If they can get through the ballistic missile defense of the Gulf states, they're going to have to do more about the drones as well. We've seen that they have caused problems, and indeed it was a drone that killed our 6 soldiers tragically in Kuwait. So the campaign, I think, is moving forward very impressively. The big question all along has been, will there be an opposition force that rises up? Could there be part of the Army in particular, which is not part of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, the regime security force? Could some pragmatic individual there say, you know what, this has brought us ruin and isolation internationally. Maybe we should actually give up our hope for a nuclear weapon and our missile program and everything else and just take advantage of being a country that has the 2nd largest gas reserves in the world and the 3rd largest oil and an educated population.
So, General, you talk about Iran being battered, and one of your successors, Admiral Cooper, we just heard from him moments ago, and he talked about the ballistic missile attacks are down roughly 90% from the Iranian side from the first day of strikes, and the drone attacks are down 83%. Those are significant numbers, obviously, General. Here was President Trump just a moment ago, and then I'll pick it up with you on the other side.
They're calling, they're saying, how do we make a deal? I said, you're being a little bit late, and we want to fight now more than they do.
What do you believe Iran's capabilities are at this point, given those numbers?
Well, it is very heartening to see those numbers come down. We've been watching this for several days now. It's the missiles, of course, that have been the most concerning. Look, one of the factors here is always what's called the missile math, and that is the calculation that's constantly being done by everyone in the region. And this is a regional missile defense effort. And that is, how many interceptors do we have left, and how many missiles and really launchers do they have left? And the CENTCOM campaign to destroy the launchers together with Israel has been very, very important because if they get through, those are the ones that cause damage. I was in Tel Aviv just a few weeks ago and saw buildings that had been struck by these missiles. Keep in mind, despite all of the extraordinary success of the combined Israel-U.S. ballistic missile defense campaign in the 12-day war, about 5 to 7% still got through. So reducing that number and reducing the threat it poses to the Gulf states now in this case as well, which I think was an unwise decision by the Iranians to hit civilian targets, not just American and Israeli targets. That brings them into the war. It did the opposite of what they expected. They thought they'd put pressure on us to end the war. Instead, the Gulf states are going to start to join us much more than they have. But the missile math is crucial here. And now there's becoming a bit of a drone math, if you will. And that is, how many of those do they have left? What are our numbers here? There we have a lot more in the terms of SHORAD, which is short air defense capability, short range. What we don't want to do is expend a missile interceptor that costs $2 million against a drone that costs $20,000 or $30,000.
And Admiral Cooper was talking about that, sort of how the math has changed now, basically being able to spend $10,000 against $100,000 or so, give or take. Here's what stood out to me, General. When we've seen these strikes, for example, this was a port. The U.S. isn't just going after everything. It's very precision, like these 2 buildings here were struck, and you could see the damage, but they left this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one. And I could show you all sorts of satellite images, and this is kind of what you see. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, said moments ago that the firepower over Iran and Tehran is about to surge dramatically. I only have about a minute left with you or so, sir, but what do you believe that looks like here in the next 24 hours or so?
Well, what it looks like is that we now have the ability to fly not just stealth fighter bombers, F-35s, and the B-2 stealth bombers, but also the real workhorses that can carry enormous payloads, the B-52s and the B-1s. We're not concerned really at this point in time about the air and ballistic missile defense of Iran as long as you stay above heavy machine gun range, and that means you can just really pour it on. I would argue that we actually have air supremacy now, not just air superiority, but I think folks are rightly cautious about those kinds of assessments publicly.
General David Petraeus, former commander of CENTCOM, former CIA director, with us tonight. It's an honor, sir. I hope you come on back. Thank you for the time and the perspective. We appreciate it.
Privileged to be with you.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
The CIA, by the way, spent $5 million, for a little bit of context here, in 1953 to achieve regime change in Iran. That effort, of course, ultimately failed. Adjusted for inflation, that number would be about $64 million, just to give you a sense of what they tried then and what we're doing now. All right, still to come, the operations in Iran entering a new phase. And with it, a new, potentially even shorter timeline for when strikes could come to a close. Plus, the man who helped manage rising gas prices during the Afghanistan invasion tells me what can be done potentially to try to reduce pain at the pump. And some of the first Americans returning home from the Mideast describe just how hard it was to get out.
We saw one wasn't canceled like yesterday, and it was to New York, and it's the only flight to New York, and I'm like skeptical, but we finally got home.
Sirens sounding again in Tel Aviv today as Iran launched more missiles toward Israel. Israel also launching new strikes near Beirut, targeting Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militant group that has vowed to avenge the death of the supreme leader. The Israeli Defense Force now saying they expect the campaign to last 1 to 2 more weeks. That is according tonight to the Times of Israel. Joining us now, former IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, thanks for joining us tonight. I know it's late where you are. We appreciate it. Does that timeline sound right to you? We had been hearing 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, and now the reporting over there is maybe just 1 to 2.
No, that doesn't sound right to me.
Okay.
That sounds wishful thinking by some reporter who either misquoted, misheard, or has an agenda. I don't know which one, but I think that we are in for a lot of work. And as the Israeli Prime Minister said just a few hours ago, there is still a lot of work ahead of us in Iran against the Iranian regime.
What does victory look like at this point? Jonathan, I hear our commander-in-chief today saying the Navy's gone, the jets are gone, the comms are gone, that the strikes are down 90 and 80% from Iran. So if that's where things stand tonight, 6 days in, what does victory look like from there in Israel?
Well, you know, victory is a pretty clearly defined thing in military affairs. It's when your enemy raises his hands and says, I can't take it anymore, I give up. And I stop fighting. When your enemy loses the will to fight or the capacity to do so, that's the definition of victory. That'll take some time because we're dealing with a fundamentalist, crazy religious regime. Not entirely sure that they will have the wisdom to actually raise their hands and spare the casualties and the bloodshed that will follow if they don't. But in other military terms, I think we're looking at a complete dismantling of Iran's offensive capabilities, their nuclear research and development, their missile launchers, and all of the ballistic missiles that they have, and to a certain extent, the dismantling of their repressive institutions that are oppressing the Iranian people. That, I think, will be the core components, but many things can happen along the way. But I think Israel eventually will look for, and maybe this differs slightly from the U.S., Israel will, I think, actively look for the removal of the regime and for a completely new and fresh situation in the Middle East. That, if you ask me, is the ultimate victory that Israel is looking for.
Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, former IDF spokesperson, thank you for the perspective tonight from the region. Appreciate it. By the way, the dogfight marks the first known time an F-35 has downed an enemy aircraft and the first aerial kill by the Israeli Air Force since the late 1980s. There was reporting about an incident out of the region today, some of what we are seeing there tonight. Well, you may have noticed the conflict in Iran is leading to a spike in gas prices. Up next, some of the options the White House has at its disposal. Plus, former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney knows firsthand how President Trump makes personal decisions and personnel decisions. So what does he make of Kristi Noem's exit? When we return. No matter where you might be in America tonight, drivers across the country getting a shock this week as average gas prices up 27 cents since the start of the war in Iran, rising from the yearly lows that we've seen over the past few months. President Trump addressing the pain at the pump at the White House just moments ago.
We had really no choice. They were going to hit us if we didn't hit them because they're crazy. And in the long term, the actions we're taking will dramatically increase the stability of the region and oil prices and stock markets and everything else.
Now, the price increases center on uncertainty over a tiny strait next to Iran off the coast there. 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. But as you can see here, traffic, look at the horn there where it goes like this, coming to a standstill, slowing down as Iran threatens to close the strait. But the president has offered some assurances for tankers passing through. Rapid Energy Group CEO Bob McNally, former advisor to President George W. Bush, joins us in a moment on what options the president might have to cut costs. But first, Connell McShane live tonight for us in the Middle East. Connell, hello, nice to see you again. Great reporting over the last few hours there on your show. And there's so much focus right now, obviously on a lot of things. But we heard the president talk about the war efforts and gas prices. And the latter comes back to the region you're in tonight.
Well, you know, I think every conflict we've talked about or covered over the years in the Middle East, the conversation has been the same coming in. Boy, I hope they don't close the Strait of Hormuz, because that would be a real problem for the global economy. Well, the problem is here. I mean, all the statistics, and you've gone through them on gas prices, that's a very quick increase. I mean, Goldman Sachs put something out before the war saying that you could see 15% if it stayed closed for a month. We've already seen 16%. But here's another one. I just saw this right before coming out here. The price of European jet fuel, has gone up 70% this week, 7-0. And 40% of Europe's jet fuel comes through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
It's going to work its way, and already is working its way into the global economy. This is, it's not really a sustainable situation. Not good.
So here is sort of where the president's starting from, though, because we heard him talk about, today, the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, how basically he had to think about national security long term and economic security here in the short term. McConnell, you know this. This is sort of the situation with gas prices. This is inflation over the last 10 years. This is gas prices. Gas prices have been kept considerably lower than what inflation has been running at. And then when you broaden out over the last, call it 30, 35 years or so, here's what I want folks to see, and you know this, but to watch. This is where we are right now. Let's draw a line back. We're at levels that we were at 15 years ago, and what else besides basically a flat screen television is the same or cheaper now than it was 15 years ago? And my point here is, yes, gas prices are rising high, but they're rising high relatively off of prices that we hadn't seen in quite some time.
That's true. That's true, and it might make it easier to absorb in the short term. This has always been a race against the clock, I think, and that's why, almost every analyst that looks at this does some sort of a projection where they say, well, if the war goes on for 10 days, 15 days, 20 days, 25 days, and then they start to make projections about what this looks like. But I'm saying that jet fuel price increase really stood out to me. There are other metrics that stand out that people are projecting out if it goes even further. But I'm saying it's happening already. So, yes, gas prices have been at a relatively low level. We pump more oil in the United States than we ever did before, which maybe insulates us from some of this more than we might have in the past. But is this a big deal? Yeah, potentially it is a big deal. And I would argue it already is for many industries. A huge deal. So, we'll see. A lot of it's going to come down to how long this lasts. We're in day 6.
Connell McShane, live for us tonight, once again in the Middle East. Stay safe out there, bud. We'll see you tomorrow on your show, 3 to 6 Eastern here on News Nation. All right, let's bring in Bob McNally, founder and president, Rapid Energy Group, author of Crude Volatility. He analyzes energy markets, including conflicts like Desert Storm. It is great to have you on. I've been watching some of what you've been putting out there and what you've been saying. I heard Bob, the president, just a little while ago say the Navy gone, the missiles gone, the comms gone. Iran right now is weakened. When do you think the Strait of Hormuz is safe for the ships to pass through, which would then sort of open up the supply again?
Yeah, Blake, no, that is the bazillion-dollar question, because until the Hormuz Strait is safe, insurance not going to help, escorts aren't going to help, SPR releases aren't going to help, anything else is sort of marginal. At Rapidan, our military advisors advise us that we can expect a gradual reopening for the next 4 weeks. We don't think we're going to be back to full flow by next week or even the week after. So if the U.S. military is successful, and I hope it is, at pummeling the assets that haven't really been hit yet, those that Iran needs to disrupt Hormuz traffic, those fast attack craft, those anti-ship cruise missiles, the mines, especially the mining boats, if they can successfully degrade that, and then I think you'll need to see the Navy put some ships through and say, look, it's safe. You start to see a trickle of ships, then you'll see a flood. I think it's going to be a little slower than most, but we'll get there.
So wherever you live across the United States tonight, Boston, Kansas City, Sacramento, parts in between, wherever you are, and you're going to the pump and you see what's happening, it's in front of people's faces. What do you think the next few weeks here look like?
Yeah, well, it's pretty predictable. Pump prices that we see in the United States tend to follow changes in global crude oil prices. After a week or two, it can be a little faster, a little slower. So just with the, since the market started to get worried about this, even before the attack, crude is up 40% since early January. And gasoline is not, about half that amount. So I could see gasoline prices on a national average basis now, higher in California, et cetera. National average getting close to the mid $3 range. We're at $3.25 as we speak. We started out at the end of last week at $3. I can see us at least going to the 340, 350. And then, as Connor said, as an analyst, you have to say it all depends on how long Hormuz is blocked. If we unblock it, we could quickly see a drop off in prices. If the blockage is prolonged, we'll see gasoline prices head towards $4 a gallon, I'm afraid.
It's interesting to hear you say that one of the things that the U.S. might end up doing here is sending its own ships in to try to send a signal of, hey, it's safe. If we can do it, you can do it. And I guess that's one of the things we'll have to look for here in the upcoming days and weeks. Robert McNally with us tonight. Check back in with us in a couple of weeks if you don't mind. Thanks for the perspective. Appreciate it.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. Meantime, the State Department urging Americans in Kuwait to evacuate tonight. And if they can't, to shelter in place. The move comes as Americans initially stranded in the Middle East are making their way back to the U.S., with many now arriving at JFK from Dubai. Our Jessica Cartalia has the very latest there tonight. Jessica?
Hi, Blake. Yeah, we spent the entire day there at JFK waiting for flights to come in. We did have one come in. We spoke with several passengers, many U.S. citizens being told to depart now from at least 12 different countries, if at all possible. The State Department saying tonight that it is working actively to get flights over their military aircraft and charter flights as it tries to get people out of the Middle East and back here to the States. The department says that they're also adding additional flights and helping with ground transportation as well. American citizens are also being urged to call the State Department phone line for assistance. We spoke with several passengers, however, who said, look, we tried to do that and didn't have any luck. Here's what they had to say.
I think we've been trying since Friday, like 28th, whatever the first day was. We've been trying to leave every day. It's like canceled, canceled, canceled. Finally, we saw one wasn't canceled like yesterday, and it was to New York, and it's the only flight to New York, and I'm like skeptical, but finally got home. But it was really hard to get home.
There was absolutely zero plan for evacuation for anyone. The phone numbers are a joke.
And Blake, tonight we're learning that the White House says that that number has in fact been updated. They have already brought back some 20,000 Americans.
Wow. Jessica Cartalia, New York City tonight. Jessica, thank you. Well, across Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota, American flags are flying at half staff in honor of the 6 fallen U.S. troops killed by an Iranian strike in Kuwait. Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds offering her condolences to the 2 families impacted in her state, honoring the Iowa Army Reserve members' bravery.
I had the opportunity to see firsthand how critical they are to the mission in the Middle East. And almost at every single stop, they were leading those missions. And I heard over and over how personally committed that they are to it. They believe in the work that they're doing. They stepped forward and they chose to serve, even in challenging and dangerous situations.
The 2 soldiers from the Hawkeye State, Major Jeffrey O'Brien, 45 years old, Sergeant Declan Cody, just 20 years old. He was posthumously promoted from specialist. Well, still to come tonight, Kristi Noem out as the DHS Secretary, and few people understand President Trump's approach to all this better than his former Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. We'll ask him what led to the firing and the change right now.
You know, President Trump has been working hard to make sure that he's delivering on what he promised the American people, and that's to make America safe again.
Quite the scene earlier today as the former DHS Secretary Kristi Noem speaking just minutes after President Trump announced her replacement, did so via social media. The president says his new DHS secretary will be Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma. Trump says Mullin will take the reins at the end of the month. And when asked about Secretary Noem, Senator Mullin had this to say up on the Hill.
She was tasked to do a very difficult job, and I think she has performed the best she can do underneath the circumstances. There's an opportunity to build off successes, and there's also opportunities to build off things that maybe didn't go quite as planned.
With me now, someone who knows a thing or two about the president's staffing, former chief of staff in the first administration, Mick Mulvaney. Hello, sir.
Hello, Burman.
There was a hearing earlier this week with questions about a $200 million plus advertising campaign at DHS. Kristi Noem was front and center of that. She said the president knew about it. President Trump today in an interview said he knew nothing about it, and then is that what happened?
That's the end. Yeah,
that's the end.
That's it. You can't get sideways with the president on something like that. Look, if the president says X and you say Y, then you need to come back and change and say X, or it's over for you. It just is. You can't get that much daylight between you and the president. I thought she was doing a decent job. No, she's under a tremendous amount of pressure on the Hill. But hearings are tough. Senate hearings are tough. People think they're easy. I've done them. I've been on both sides of them, asking the questions, answering the questions. And the general rule, if you are the person answering questions, is don't make news. And Kristi made some news.
Yeah, she made a lot of it. Why Markwayne Mullin? You know him well. Why him? The president could have gone sort of across the board. Why?
Yeah, I know them both. Kristi and I were classmates together. I think Markwayne got to Congress about 2 years after I got here, so I've known him for about 10 years. Trump likes him. He's really good. He's really good on these issues. Mark ran, people know him because he's a mixed martial arts guy. That's what he is. That's why he's famous, other than being a senator. But he's run some fairly decent-sized businesses. He's got some executive experience, but he seems to be on the same page. The president has a lot of respect for him. He's a tough guy, and the president likes that. He can sort of, get in the president's face and back and forth. The president likes that. So I think they will communicate really, really well. I like the pick. The Senate pick is an easy explanation. If you take somebody out of the House, there has to be a special election, which could take months. This is a senator. He'll be replaced by the Republican governor of Oklahoma immediately, so there'll be no gap and no absences in the Senate.
I'm looking at a change of leadership at the Department of Homeland Security on day 6 of a war abroad, and there's questions about securing the homeland.
Yeah.
Does that timing worry you at all?
It's not ideal, but it doesn't worry me because I know how the agencies work, okay? And there's other folks running, be somebody in charge of CBP, someone in charge of TSA. So those folks are still there. You're changing the person at the very top, but you're not changing all of the leadership. It's not ideal. I'm more worried about the fact, and it doesn't get much attention, sadly, is that DHS is unfunded.
So does taking Noem out of the equation, there had been some thinking that if the president fires Kristi Noem, then maybe that could build up some goodwill with Democrats and maybe move them closer to a DHS funding deal. Is that part of the calculus here, or no?
A little bit. For some Democrats, maybe. Keep in mind, for a lot of Democrats, it had nothing to do with Kristi Noem and everything to do with Donald Trump, and he's still here, so they're still going to be upset, and a lot of the same policies. But senators, like senators, I've already heard a couple Democrat senators say nice things about Markwayne. Doesn't mean they'll confirm him, but it does give you an idea of the temperature. So I fully expect him to be confirmed. Whether or not there's any real significant policy changes, I think that remains to be seen.
By the way, here was the Defense Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, today, asked by our Libby Dean about Kristi Noem.
Kristi did a great job setting us up for success. So I don't have any concerns about whether or not the homeland will be covered down on.
So that's some of the administration's line today on that.
It's fine. Yeah, and then, listen, they gave her they didn't fire her. They moved her to a different position.
I mean,
it's a demotion.
Yeah.
I get it. Listen, I got demoted when I left the Chiefs. I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about this, but they still like her enough to keep her around. Okay. Listen, there were folks that Donald Trump had me fire that we didn't keep around in the administration. So there's a different level of Hades there, and she's not in it.
All right, Mick Mulvaney.
Can I say Hades on television?
I think you're fine.
Okay,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy.
By the way, he deployed during Afghanistan. So there are serious differences between what we're seeing now and back then. Congressman Rich McCormick joins us on the other side.
But they're tough, and they want to fight. And they're calling, they're saying, how do we make a deal? I said, you're being a little bit late. And we want to fight now more than they do. I built the military and rebuilt it in my first term, and we're using it more than I'd like to use it, to be honest with you. But when we used it, we found out it certainly did work.
President Trump today revealing that Iran tried to contact the U.S. to make a deal, but admitting he's no longer interested. Meantime, the House of Representatives voting down a war powers resolution that would have curtailed the president's authorities, or at least tried to, in Iran. With me now, Rich McCormick, Republican from Georgia, Marine, former Marine, as well, helicopter pilot. You flew in Afghanistan, right?
Well, I didn't fly in Afghanistan.
Okay,
I was an emergency room physician in Role 3 Hospital in Kandahar as the head of emergency medicine.
Got it.
And then I was in the Persian Gulf for 2 tours as a helicopter pilot for the Marine Corps. So,
man of many titles, I take it. You've been calling for this action across Iran for years. And the president today basically said the Navy's gone, the Air Force is gone, the communications are gone. We heard from Bradley Cooper of CENTCOM that 90% of the drones basically have fallen. At this point, how much longer do you expect this to take?
I want to make sure we finish the job. The worst thing we do is leave them intact to produce these mass production of drones and things that can reach out and touch countries around them. That they have deliverables, whether it be a dirty bomb or a nuclear arsenal, that would be catastrophic.
Do you think at this point they have any sort of capabilities at that level?
I don't know that we have any confirmation that nuclear arsenal is taken care of. So no, they don't have an arsenal, but the nuclear materials, we have no idea where they took it. We don't know if it was moved before we bombed it. We don't know. We don't have any confirmation of what we know. They can't produce it. They don't have centrifuges. But do we really know? Do we have any confirmation where that nuclear material is enough to build 2 nuclear warheads? That we don't know.
How comfortable are you with this potentially lasting weeks? We've heard maybe 4 to 5, and then the number 8 was thrown out the other day as well.
I am comfortable with any amount of time it takes to finish this. Don't do anything halfway. We've made a mistake in the past, whether it be Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. When you go halfway, it gets worse. And the people get worn out. They don't want to continue. You'll lose popular support. I'm not saying this is a popular war, but most people understand how bad Iran is. When the further the curtain's pulled back and you listen to what they said and what they were trying to do, that we're the great Satan that they wanted to destroy, that they were building towards nuclear weapons, that they lied to us repeatedly. When Obama gave them money, billions of dollars, what did they say they weren't going to do? Enrich uranium. And they did it anyways, because they're allowed to, by their religion, lie to us in bad faith.
I spoke to General David Petraeus at the top of the show. Here's what he said.
We're not concerned really at this point in time about the air and ballistic missile defense of Iran as long as you stay above heavy machine gun range. And that means you can just really pour it on. I would argue that we actually have air supremacy now, not just air superiority. But I think folks are rightly cautious about those kinds of assessments.
From a military perspective, this is going as well. I think that the American military could have hoped, and we've heard as much essentially from the commander-in-chief. Let me show you what's going on in Georgia, in your backyard, though, because there's a story that's developing about gas prices. For example, Georgia, it's up 39 cents in just the past week. What would you say to the folks back home who are driving to the pump right now and seeing that?
It's temporary. It'll come back down again.
How temporary?
Remember when Biden was president? It was a lot higher for a long time. And people got used to it, and they made excuses for it. But when we have production increase again, when we have OPEC nations stepping up, when the Gulf is open back up again, when we're not worried about mining, you're going to see a lot more oil flood the market again. We can step up our production very easily. By the way, it would have been a lot easier had we been friendly to oil. What
would you say if someone said to you, I don't think the high prices are worth it?
A lot of people are going to be against this. That's normal. And by the way, it's okay to disagree. That's what makes our great nation great, because we can disagree. We don't. As a matter of fact, if we all agree on everything,
right,
that's a really bad scenario. People will disagree for different reasons. I hope they don't disagree just because they hate Trump, which is, by the way, a great majority of the people. Whatever he does, it's going to be bad. But I think this is a player that we're going to save potentially thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people's lives. Not just in Iran, by the way,
right,
but around the world, by taking out a regime that has basically dedicated itself to eliminating Israel, eliminating the United States, has had proxy wars against us for 50 years.
I got to run. Rich McCormick, Congressman, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I thank you for watching us tonight here on The Hill. I'm Blake Burman. Elizabeth Vargas Reports starts right now.